Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling cases in Missouri history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. What locations and times of day or night these recorded stories reach are of interest to us. It was 1876. In the far reaches of Missouri, something darker was taking root. While in Philadelphia, the country had recently celebrated its centennial with much fanfare. The soil in Crow Hollow, a tiny community tucked away between thick oak trees and limestone bluffs in the shadow of the Ozark Mountains, had secrets that would be kept hidden for over a century. The closest significant town, Ava, is located in Missouri's Douglas County. It was much smaller in 1876, consisting of a general shop, 2 churches, a number of wooden buildings, and a few homesteads connected by dirt roads that turned to mud with every downpour. Today, it is a peaceful community of just over 3,000 people. About 7 miles southeast of Ava proper, Crow Hollow was merely a name given to a depression in the ground where a number of people had set up homesteads next to a creek known to the locals as Finley Branch. The first odd event was recorded in the journal of Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, who at the time was the only doctor in the greater Ava area. This seemingly ordinary medical observation would later be recognized as the first recorded evidence of something seriously amiss in Crow Hollow. His journal entry from April 17, 1876, states, "Called to the Thorne residence again, the 3rd visit this month. Mrs. Thorne exhibits the same symptoms as before: dilated pupils, incoherent speech, trembling in the extremities. Mr. Thorne insists it is a nervous condition. I am no longer certain." Just 2 years before, the Thorne family Isaiah, his brother Jeremiah, and his wife Margaret had relocated from Pennsylvania to the region. They bought 70 acres of property, constructed a simple 2-story farmhouse, and assimilated into the neighborhood right away. At the Crow Hollow Baptist Church, a little wooden building that catered to the spiritual requirements of roughly 40 regular members, Isaiah was appointed a deacon. This instance is very troubling not only because of what transpired but also because of how completely it was removed from official documents. When local historian Edwin Winters tried to look into the church's founding in 1953, he found that the county archives did not include any records from 1875 to 1879. Pages of the church registry itself had been carefully cut out, as though someone had deliberately eliminated a period of history. The documents had been intact when catalogued in 1932 according to Winters's notes, which were kept in the University of Missouri's archives until their unexplained disappearance in 1968, according to the librarian who helped him. In the years that had passed, someone who had access to the county's secure archives had taken them out. This implied a conscious effort to conceal what had happened in Crow Hollow, rather than only a historical oddity. The remaining documents provide a piecemeal account. 11 parcels of land in and around Crow Hollow changed hands between January and October 1876, according to land documents, which is a disproportionately high number of transactions for such a tiny settlement. 8 of these residences were bought by people who had never lived in the area before, and they all had the same prior St. Louis address, 1421 Locust Street. In the 1,950 seconds, Winters looked into this address and found that it had belonged to a building that had been destroyed in a fire in 1879, supposedly holding a philosophical society about which not much was left. If not for the entries made in the personal notebook of a railroad postal worker named Franklin Pierce, the St. Louis connection could have remained only odd. On the 23rd of May 1876, Pierce, who worked the street, Louis to Springfield route, wrote, "Another strange package bound for Ava today. Heavy crate marked agricultural equipment, but weighed far less than it should. Makes the 3rd such shipment this month addressed to Ith Thorne at the general delivery." A later entry, dated June 7, stated, "Crate arrived damaged from Springfield, contents partially visible. Appears to be books bound in dark leather and something wrapped in oilcloth. Station master insisted on securing it before forwarding to Ava. Curious smell emanating from within. Not unpleasant, but unusual. Like damp earth. And something sweeter. It would be decades before it became apparent what these shipments contained. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. The flow of life in Crow Hollow had become strange by June 1876. Reports from nearby communities indicated that the hole had grown more remote. In Ava, families who had frequently gone on market days were abruptly missing. When asked why he continued to make weekly journeys for supplies, Isaiah Thorne said that many had been confined to their houses due to a summer fever. The Journal of Dr. Blackwood contradicts this. The doctor's suspicions were confirmed later that month when Margaret Thorne showed up in his Ava office with bruises around her neck and wrists. His June 12th entry states, "No cases of fever in the hollow that I have been called to treat, yet Thorne insists many are ill." When I offered to ride out, he became agitated and said it wasn't necessary. Something is not right with that man. Her eyes did not meet his, as she told him that she had fallen from a porch. Despite being physically present, the doctor observed that she appeared to be away in spirit and that she kept whispering something that sounded like, "The earth speaks through us now." In order to allay his mounting worries, Dr. Blackwood personally rode out to Crow Hollow a week later, supposedly to see how Margaret was doing. One of the few first-hand reports of the hollow during this crucial time is seen in his diary entry on June 28. Arrived at the hollow near midday. An unnatural quiet pervades the place. No children playing, no men working fields, no women tending gardens, though all these tasks should be at their height in this season. Called at the Miller farm first, finding no one home, though smoke rose from the chimney and a pot of stew simmered on the hearth, proceeded to the Edwards place with similar results. Finally reached the Thorne residence, where I found Isaiah on the porch, as if expecting me. He seemed changed, thinner, yet somehow more vigorous. His eyes have a peculiar clarity I've not seen before. He invited me in, but blocked my path when I moved toward the stairs, saying Margaret was resting and could not be disturbed. From somewhere in the house came a low rhythmic sound, like many voices speaking in unison. When I inquired, Thorne said it was prayer meeting day, and that some community members had gathered in the back rooms. Most disturbing was what I glimpsed in the front room. The furniture had been removed, and the floor covered with dark soil, as if the earth itself had been brought indoors. In the center stood what appeared to be a stone pedestal. Thorne saw me looking and closed the door, saying they were bringing the garden inside as an experiment for growing herbs during winter. I departed without seeing Margaret, convinced something is deeply amiss, but unable to identify any clear cause for legal or medical intervention. Dr. Blackwood had good instincts. 3 days after his visit, he was unexpectedly called to his office in Ava by Isaiah's brother, Jeremiah Thorne, who showed up after dark, clearly upset and demanding solitude. The doctor said that Jeremiah talked in quick, hushed tones, looking constantly at the door as though he was afraid of being caught. In early April, he said, his brother was drilling a new well on their property when he found something that made him change. Whatever they discovered, which Jeremiah would only characterize as something that should have remained buried, had caught Isaiah's attention. He brings it out at night, Jeremiah allegedly informed the physician. Jeremiah said he had resisted, feigning to take part while preparing his escape. Brings everyone in the hollow to see it. Says it's proof of what lies beneath, what's always been beneath. They listen to it, doctor. They press their ears to it, and then they speak differently afterward. Margaret was the first. Now almost everyone has listened. He insisted that local officials would not comprehend the seriousness of the problem and urged Dr. Blackwood to get in touch with authorities in Springfield or possibly Street. Louis. He pushed a folded piece of paper into the doctor's palm before he left. A crude drawing of a curved device with marks that looked like some sort of script, but not one the doctor recognized. The next day, still unsure of the precise situation but sufficiently disturbed, Dr. Blackwood wrote a letter to the county sheriff. The letter never came. The physician's final journal entry dated July 3rd, Jeremiah Thorne found dead on the road to Springfield this morning. Horse threw him, according to witnesses, struck his head on a rock. Very convenient timing. I no longer feel safe. Will depart for my brother's home in Illinois tomorrow. Left notes of my concerns with Reverend Stern. God help the people of Crow Hollow. Crow Hollow had completely changed by July, but the outside world was mostly unaware of it. In Missouri, the summer of 1876 was especially hot and dry, and most people were worried about their animals and crops. The little Baptist church in the hollow had ceased to ring its bell on Sundays, but few noticed. Concerned about Deacon Thorne and his congregation's absence, Reverend Malachi Stern of Ava's Major Baptist Church wrote to Crow Hollow on July 17. His description of a deserted scene was retained in a letter to the local Baptist Association. The church stood empty, dust gathering on the pews. The Bible lay open on the pulpit to the book of Revelation. When I called at the Thorne residence, I was met with a cold reception. Isaiah appeared gaunt, his eyes sunken, yet he moved with a strange energy. He informed me that the congregation had decided to worship in their own way, and requested that I respect their privacy in this matter. I departed with unease in my heart. During his visit, Reverend Stern saw other alarming signs, which he later disclosed to his wife in private writing that was discovered among her belongings after her death in 1912. He saw newly churned soil in a wide rectangular space behind the Thorne home, as though a vast garden had just been planted, yet nothing grew there. Upon leaving, he caught a further unsettling view from a window. A circle of at least a dozen people standing in the front room of the Thorne, swaying gently, their arms extended towards something in the center that the Reverend could not see. Stern had good reason to be uneasy. When Douglas County Sheriff William Doggery rode out to investigate, he discovered nothing wrong. 3 days after his visit, a farmer named Joseph Miller, whose property bordered Crow Hollow, told the sheriff that he had heard strange noises coming from the hollow at night. "Not like any animal known to these parts, but something between a wail and a chant. Miller might have heard a group of guys singing work songs while clearing a fresh field," Isaiah Thorne reassured him. The sheriff accepted this explanation because there was no proof of misconduct and he had other duties in the county. For over 2 months, that was the final formal visit to Crow Hollow. Only shards of evidence that survived the subsequent methodical erasure can be used to piece together what transpired during those months. Ava's Merchant's Ledger reveals a significant shift in Isaiah Thorne's purchases. Even though the Thornes had their own cattle, he started purchasing enormous quantities of candles, salt, rare plants, and, on 3 occasions, butcher's meat from the pharmacy instead of the typical farm supplies and household essentials. On August 12th, the merchant's wife overheard an odd exchange, which is also noted in the ledger. Samuel Edwards, another man from the hollow, was with Thorne. Edwards reportedly conversed with another customer while Thorne was doing business, telling them that the people of Crow Hollow had found the true path and that the old gods speak from beneath the earth. When pressed further, Edwards reportedly became defensive and returned to Thorne, who appeared to be annoyed by the exchange. And then there was the stone issue. Shipping records from the closest quarry in August showed that limestone blocks were sent to Crow Hollow, which was an uncommon cost for an agricultural settlement. In an interview with Edwin Winters in 1954, the son of the quarry owner recalled his father bringing up the peculiar requirements Thorne had set. Every block had to be the same size and devoid of any Christian symbolism, because the quarry occasionally included little crosses on stones intended for church construction. Decades later, the older quarrymen remembered the request as strange. Until the accidental discovery in 1962, no one knew what these stones were used for. Even the most indifferent spectator would have realized that Crow Hollow was in trouble by September. The annual Harvest Festival in Ava, which usually drew people from far and wide, was attended by no one from the village. Smoke rose steadily from several places in the hollow, as could be seen from nearby ridges, but no one appeared to be caring for fields or cattle. When a peddler came through the area in late September, he informed the proprietor of the general store in Ava that he had completely avoided Crow Hollow since the road was blocked by fallen trees. From a nearby ridge, he could see what seemed like massive excavations all around the hollow, with earthen mounds stacked next to deep trenches. His assertion that the excavations seemed to be following a pattern concentric circles radiating from a center location close to Finley Branch was the most odd. Before his own disappearance in early October, Joseph Miller, the nearby farmer who had previously reported weird sounds, added one last item to the historical record. He wrote, I can no longer sleep at night. The sounds from the hollow have changed. There are voices now, many voices speaking in unison, words I cannot understand. And worse, there is movement in the woods at the edge of my property, dark figures that stand and watch. Yesterday, I found strange markings carved into the trunk of an oak tree at my property line, like a serpent coiled around itself. I've decided to ride to Springfield and bring back authorities with more power than our local sheriff. Something unholy has taken root here, and I fear for my soul if I stay. The letter goes on to provide information not previously disclosed to local authorities. 2 nights passed. I witnessed a procession moving from the hollow toward the creek. They carried torches and moved in single file, perhaps 20 or more people. At their head walked Isaiah Thorne, bearing something in his arms, wrapped in cloth. They gathered at the creek and remained until dawn, chanting continuously. I could not distinguish the words, but the cadence was unlike any prayer or hymn I know. When they departed at first light, the object Thorne carried was no longer with him. I believe they have buried something in the stream bed, something they worship. God forgive me for my cowardice in not confronting this evil sooner. Miller did not make it to Springfield. His saddled but unriderless horse was discovered straying close to the road. Sheriff Daugherty assembled a search party, but 3 days later, they were unable to locate the farmer. A more complete examination was eventually spurred by this absence. On the 7th of October, 1876, Sheriff Daugherty rode into Crow Hollow with Reverend Stern and 4 deputies in order to perform a thorough search of the region. One of the few key documents that survived the subsequent record sweep was the sheriff's official report, which detailed what they found or didn't discover. Arrived at Crow Hollow at approximately 10:00 inches the morning. The settlement appeared deserted. No smoke from chimneys. No livestock in pens or fields. The doors to all residences stood open, as if the occupants had just stepped out. Inside the homes, we found meals half-eaten on tables, beds unmade, clothing still hanging to dry. There was no sign of violence or struggle, merely an impression of sudden departure. Most disturbing was the church, where we discovered strange symbols painted on the walls and floor in a substance that appeared to be animal blood. The Bible had been removed from the pulpit, and in its place stood a crude stone carving resembling a serpent. The report continues. We proceeded to the Thorne residence, which, unlike the others, showed signs of recent occupation. A fire still smoldered in the hearth. In the cellar, we discovered a tunnel dug into the earth, approximately 4 feet in diameter, extending beyond the range of our lanterns. Due to concerns about structural stability, we did not explore further, but noted that a draft of air came from within, suggesting it connected to another space. We have established a perimeter around the hollow and sent for assistance from the bi-state authorities. The discovery of a leather-bound book in Isaiah Thorne's bedroom was something the sheriff later revealed to Reverend Stern as documented in the Reverend's private notebook, but left out of his official report. Drawings of serpents in different positions were scattered throughout the book, which looked to be fairly old and was written in a language neither guy understood. Among the most unsettling were the recent English annotations in the margins, which appeared to be in Thorne's handwriting, and included phrases such as the way beneath, ascension through the soil, and repeated references to the ancient one who waits in darkness. The search party also discovered items at Finley Branch that were not mentioned in official documents. They found a stone construction partially immersed in the water at a place where the stream spread into a tiny pool. It was some sort of platform with a central depression supported by columns. They discovered dozens of little items in the surrounding mud, including animal bones, porcelain shards, bearing strange markings, and tiny figurines made of wood and bone that resembled snakes. The ground around this building had been pushed down hard, as though by the weight of many feet. That help never came in any significant form. Upon receiving a response 2 weeks later, state representatives performed a superficial investigation and deemed the situation to be one of community migration, implying that the inhabitants had simply made the decision to relocate and had done so in a chaotic manner. The tunnel was written off as an incomplete storm shelter or root cellar, No one who had personally visited Crow Hollow was satisfied with this explanation, but there was little reason to look into it further because there was no proof of a crime, no bodies, and no victims other than Joseph Miller, who was reported missing, and authorities speculated might have just fallen off his horse and wandered off or been disoriented. After seizing the church's property, the Baptist Association boarded up the structure and finally disassembled it in 1880, using the lumber to build an addition to the main Ava church. Although many of the other Crow Hollow properties sat unoccupied for years, the county eventually repossessed them for unpaid taxes and sold them. Therefore, if it weren't for the 1962 drought, the mystery of Crow Hollow might have remained hidden forever, written off as a strange anecdote in local history. It was the driest summer the area has ever experienced. Sections of the stream bed that had been buried for decades were exposed when Finley Branch, which originally ran through what was Crow Hollow, dwindled to a trickle. There, while looking for arrowheads, a local kid named Raymond Collins found something sticking out of the mud that would spark interest in the long-forgotten events of 1876. Collins discovered a about 2-foot square stone tablet with a center depiction of a serpent consuming its own tail surrounded by elaborate markings. The clay that had covered the tablet for decades prevented erosion, allowing it to remain amazingly intact. A list of names that were hardly visible around the tablet's edge included individuals that were identified as Crow Hollow residents in 1876 by land records. Collins presented his discovery to his Ava High School history teacher, Walter Jenkins. Given the possible historical relevance, Jenkins reached out to Edwin Winters, the local historian who had already come across the gap in church records. Jenkins and Winters started working together to look at the old village in greater detail. They could follow the stream bed through the center of what had been Crow Hollow because it was unusually low. What they found were a number of stone foundations for something quite different from the dwellings that would have been constructed at that time, which would have mostly been made of wood. Around what seemed like a stone altar, the foundations formed concentric circles. They discovered tiny stone platforms spaced regularly around this main building. A ceremonial site that had been purposefully built in the stream bed and intended to be partially submerged under normal circumstances was suggested by the layout. Winters took careful notes on their discoveries, sketching the site's layout and taking pictures. According to his observations, which were later published in the Journal of Ozark Folklore, 1963, the center altar showed evidence of extreme heat, as though it had been repeatedly charred by fires. Additionally, he observed an odd staining on the stone that, according to a subsequent chemical investigation, was consistent with animal blood. What Winters found, lodged in the middle altar stone, a tiny hollow holding a glass vial, was perhaps the most important discovery. A piece of tightly rolled parchment, written in what looked to be the handwriting of Isaiah Thorne, was found inside the vial. It read, "We have made communion with what dwells beneath. We go now to prepare the way elsewhere. When the waters recede again, the faithful will return. The serpent is patient." A team from the University of Missouri carried out a more official archaeological examination as a result of the discovery. Even more unsettling information about what had happened in Crow Hollow was uncovered by their work, which continued sporadically until 1965. The site displayed traces of ritualistic activity similar with some esoteric traditions described in isolated settlements during the post-Civil War period, according to the 1966 archaeological report, which oddly was never fully published. The research specifically pointed out parallels to cult practices, including earth worship and serpent iconography, that have been documented in Appalachia and areas of Louisiana. In her field notes, which, in contrast to the official report, have survived in the university archives, lead archaeologist Dr. Elisa Montgomery wrote, "The site suggests a sophisticated understanding of ritual space. The concentric arrangement with increasingly restricted access as one moves toward the center mirrors sacred sites found in ancient cultures worldwide. What's remarkable is how recently this was constructed, and by individuals with presumably traditional Christian backgrounds." The speed of this transformation suggests either a pre-existing hidden belief system suddenly brought to light or an extraordinarily powerful catalyzing event. The archaeological team's most important finding was a system of tunnels beneath the stream bed, which had been purposefully flooded when a small man-made dam was built downstream. Larger rooms excavated out of the limestone that underlies a big portion of the area were connected to the tunnels. They discovered pieces of what looked to be intentionally vandalized religious literature in one of these rooms, as well as the remains of the original church bell from the Crow Hollow Baptist Church. Dr. Montgomery's notes go into great detail about the tunnels. Extensive network, far beyond what a small community could have reasonably constructed in the time frame indicated by historical records. Some sections appear much older, possibly natural caverns that were enlarged and connected. The walls in the deeper chambers bear carvings distinct from those found at the surface site, less refined but somehow more disturbing. They depict a large serpent-like entity emerging from beneath the earth, with human figures prostrating themselves before it, or in some cases being absorbed into its form. The location was noticeably devoid of any indication of human remains. It was rare for a population of that size during that time, when house burials were still customary, that no burials were found despite considerable excavation. Because of this absence, there was conjecture that either the residents had indeed left the area as indicated by the official record, or that the remains might have been buried somewhere else. Where did they go, though, if they left? Edwin Winters extended his research outside of Douglas County in response to this query. He traced census data, birth certificates, and land records for years before publishing his findings in a monograph called The Displaced of Crow Hollow, 1968. Winters' investigation uncovered something remarkable. People with the names of Crow Hollow residents were listed in at least 7 states, from Louisiana to Oregon. Between 1,877 and 1,880. These people founded tiny, isolated villages in far-flung locations in each instance. These settlements likewise vanished under strange causes, within 10 years in 3 documented cases. The most famous was New Eden, a hamlet in rural Washington state that was unexpectedly abandoned in 1887 after authorities became aware of strange religious rituals. According to a newspaper article from the era, a stone building that was half underground and decorated with carvings of serpents and unidentified symbols was discovered. Whatever had taken root in Crow Hollow had not perished there. Rather, it had proliferated and established new outposts throughout the American frontier. Winters kept a careful eye on the dissemination pattern. In 1878, Isaiah and Margaret Thorne bought a secluded piece of land close to the present-day Bighorn National Forest, according to land records in Wyoming area. By 1882, a group of about 30 people had gathered around them. According to county records, local officials looked into the hamlet in 1883 when hunters reported weird buildings and meetings at night, but they couldn't find enough evidence to justify action. Around 1885, the Thorns and a few others moved again, this time to Northern California, and the town seems to have disbanded. Although Winters pointed up an intriguing article in a San Francisco newspaper from 1890 about a cult of serpent worshippers found in a secluded part of Humboldt County, whose leader went by the name of Isaiah and claimed to be able to connect with ancient creatures that live beneath the earth, the trail becomes chilly there. In 1877, the Crow Hollow-born Samuel Edwards family returned to Louisiana and settled in the Bayou region west of New Orleans. In just 2 years, Edwards had gained notoriety in the area for advocating for what the local press characterized as a syncretic religion that blended elements of Christianity with ancient customs. His followers were mostly found in remote swampland villages, apart from official government supervision and other religious establishments. Edwards's gang was accused of performing strange chanting and animal sacrifice at night, according to a parish document dated 1881. Edwards and his main supporters reportedly left the area before authorities could conduct a thorough investigation, leaving behind rudimentary stone structures with imagery of serpents resembling that of Crow Hollow. An unexpected source provided the last piece of the puzzle. After hearing about Winters' research, A woman named Eleanor Thorne approached him in 1967, claiming to be a descendant of Isaiah Thorne's brother who had stayed in Pennsylvania. She had Isaiah's correspondence with his family from 1874 to 1876, which became more bizarre and unsettling as time went on. Isaiah's work with the church and the difficulties of starting a new farm were discussed in the early correspondence, but by late 1875, the tone had drastically changed. Eleanor Thorne also shared family stories passed down through generations, stories never before recorded. Isaiah wrote of discoveries made beneath the soil and truths older than the Word of God. He also described dreams in which the great serpent speaks wisdom to those who will listen, and made repeated references to the renewal that comes from below. Even in Pennsylvania, Isaiah had always been a disturbed, inquisitive spirit, according to family legend. He had temporarily belonged to a small Philadelphia intellectual group that investigated mystical traditions and ancient faiths when he was a young man. His family had thought that his restless temperament would be placated by relocating to the West and securing a respectable job as a church deacon. On the contrary, it appeared to have given him the chance to completely embrace any other beliefs he may have been holding. Winters confirmed the authenticity of the letters by comparing the handwriting with Isaiah Thorne's signature on land deeds. The last letter, dated September 1876, has perhaps the most terrifying passage. We have heard the voice from the earth and are answered. The old ways were built on lies. The serpent brings truth. It moves through us now. We are becoming something glorious and terrible. Do not mourn for us when you hear what has happened. We have not perished, but transformed. We go now to prepare other gardens for the seed we carry. Although the originals were apparently given to the special collections of the University of Missouri, he included transcripts in his monograph. But in 1969, when scholars tried to retrieve them, the institution said they had been lost during an archive rearrangement. In the Crow Hollow case, this expedient deletion of evidence has been a recurrent motif. When strong rains returned to the area in 1966, the site was submerged after the archaeological study. Some have theorized that the stone constructions were purposefully destroyed or demolished because subsequent attempts to transfer them have failed. In 1967, the archaeological team's leader, Dr. Montgomery, wrote in a private letter to a colleague, "I cannot escape the feeling that our work is being deliberately obscured. Key artifacts have vanished from storage, field notes have been altered, and sections of the site that we documented thoroughly are now somehow absent when revisited. Someone does not want this story told." In his last years, Edwin Winters himself grew more and more paranoid, accusing others of following him and tampering with his research materials. Just 2 months before his death, in March 1968, Winters wrote in his journal, "I feel like I am being watched. I've seen the same car parked across from my house twice this week. Yesterday when I got home, I found my front door unlocked, even though I clearly remember locking it. Nothing seemed disturbed inside, but the air had a strange smell, something sweet and earthy, which reminded me of what Dr. Blackwood described in his account of the Thorne residence. I fear they have found me." Winters passed away in a house fire in 1968, a few months after his monograph was published. The majority of his research notes and personal documents were destroyed in the fire. Although an overturned kerosene lamp was reported as the official cause, Winters's acquaintances pointed out that he had made the conversion to electric lighting years prior. Refusing to talk about the Crow Hollow issue further, Walter Jenkins, who had helped with the first examination of the streambed location, abruptly left his teaching post in 1967 and relocated to California. Before leaving, he gave a brief interview to a local newspaper, saying only that some things should remain buried and telling others to let sleeping serpents lie. Jenkins's former student later said that the teacher had told him about an unusual experience at the archaeological site. Jenkins was alone at the site one evening recording some recently discovered engravings when he heard a sound like many voices whispering together coming from one of the tunnels, according to this report. According to reports, Jenkins left the scene and never came back by himself when he pointed his flashlight into the darkness and saw something moving that should not move, stone flowing like water, taking forms that made no sense. The stone tablet's discoverer, Raymond Collins, reportedly experienced nightmares for years following. He was admitted to the state psychiatric hospital in 1969 when he was 25 years old and discovered using a hunting knife to carve serpent symbols into the walls of his bedroom. He constantly stated, according to hospital records, that he could hear them moving underground and that they're still down there, waiting to rise again. Collins produced hundreds of drawings during his therapy that he described as nighttime visions. Numerous depicted subterranean rooms where rites were conducted around stone altars by human figures with serpentine traits. Others showed a huge snake-like creature that sprang from the dirt, its body made up of hundreds of human bodies entwined. It is possible that Collins's participation with the archaeological discovery caused the hospital professionals to attribute these unsettling images to psychosis. Collins was in an institution until 1972, when he was sent to live with family in a different state. For the rest of his life, he reportedly refused to talk about the Crow Hollow incident and never went back to Missouri. At the Ava Public Library, the stone tablet, the only tangible proof that was still readily available, was stored in a display case until 1968, when it was taken during a break-in in which nothing else was taken. It has never been found again. Years later, in a peculiar side note to this theft, surfaced when a former library staffer stated in a local history newsletter that numerous people had come to the library just to look at the tablet in the weeks preceding the break-in. Regarded as scholarly types and claiming to be from different colleges, these visitors studied the relic for hours while taking pictures and notes. None provided contact details, and efforts to confirm their institutional connections were unsuccessful. Nearly all of the tangible proof and many of the main records pertaining to Crow Hollow had disappeared by 1969. Scattered newspaper accounts, copies of Winter's writings, a few photos of the stream bed location, and local tales that have become almost folklore are all that are left. Though it was only briefly recorded before vanishing from the record, the crew discovered what may have been the most important discovery of all during the last stage of the archaeological dig in 1965. Before the site was inundated, they found a little stone box sealed with an odd, resinous substance in a chamber deep within the network of tunnels. It contained what Dr. Montgomery's field notes referred to as a carved stone cylinder, approximately 8 inches in length, covered in symbols similar to those found on the tablet, but more extensive and refined. The cylinder was sent to the university for examination, but no formal report on it was ever released. According to Dr. Montgomery's notes, she thought the artifact was centuries older than the Crow Hollow village, indicating that whatever Isaiah Thorne had found on his land in 1876 was actually very old, possibly from an indigenous society that archaeologists had not yet been able to learn about. Under magnification, the symbols revealed an astonishing level of detail that could not have been achieved with the instruments available to 19th century settlers, according to a laboratory worker who worked briefly with the artifact. Even more unsettling was his claim that the stone glowed faintly when submerged in water and that the engraving seemed to move slightly, as though the serpent shapes were moving across the surface. The region that was formerly known as Crow Hollow is now under water from a small reservoir that was built as part of a flood control project in the 1970 seconds. The name is no longer used on official maps. To get to the location, drive roughly 4 miles south on Highway 5 from Ava, then turn east on County Road 94 and drive another 3 miles or so to the reservoir. Fishermen sometimes report unusual disturbances in the water, and fish caught near the center of the reservoir often appear deformed or diseased. Locals say that on especially calm nights, when the water is calm, strange sounds can sometimes be heard coming from beneath the surface, described as like many voices whispering together. Strange carvings of serpent symbols resembling those found in historical texts were discovered on trees close to the coastline by a park ranger who worked at the reservoir. In the 1,980 seconds, no visitors were seen creating the sculptures, but they would appear overnight and were found during morning patrols. Security patrols were boosted and the impacted trees were eventually taken down, but ostensibly for routine maintenance and vandalism prevention. Are these reports true in any way? There is no way to know for sure. We do know, however, that something occurred in Crow Hollow in 1876, something that many people made a concerted effort to hide. A conscious attempt to obliterate this period of history is suggested by the methodical destruction of documents, the loss of evidence, and the unwillingness of authorities to conduct a thorough investigation. In 1979, Dr. Harold Sumner, a retired professor from the University of Missouri who had an indirect role in the archaeological study, wrote a paper in a little-known academic journal called Serpent Cults in American History: Continuity and Disruption. In it, he suggested that the events at Crow Hollow were not a singular incident, but rather a part of a broader pattern of occult religious practices that had been practiced in America since colonial times. According to Sumner, some pre-Christian doctrines based on the worship of serpents had persisted in isolated areas throughout American history, sometimes coming to light before being repressed or driven underground once more. He mentioned other situations from the post-Civil War era, such as Crow Hollow, the Ohio Valley in the 1,820 seconds, and New England in the 1,690 seconds. According to Sumner, the apparent catalyst, some tangible item or revelation that swiftly sped up the conversion process, was what made the Crow Hollow case unique, not the belief system per se. He conjectured that Isaiah Thorne may have found a relic from an ancient indigenous society that worshipped serpents, and that this finding in some way helped such ideas proliferate among his people. Mainstream historians mostly disregarded the paper, which received little attention at the time. After Sumner's death in 1981, his personal documents, which allegedly included far more in-depth research on the subject, were given to a university archive, where they are still uncatalogued and unavailable. The ramifications of Edwin Winter's investigation into the dispersion of the Crow Hollow inhabitants are maybe the most unsettling of all. If his research is correct, the ideas and customs that were established in that little Missouri nook did not perish there. Rather, they expanded throughout the nation, creating new outposts in remote locations where they could persist unhindered. It seems that this dispersion and reestablishment pattern persisted after the first wave that Winters recorded. Authorities in rural Idaho looked into a small community in 1962, the same year the drought uncovered the Crow Hollow site. The group's members traced their ancestry back to founders who had come from California around 1900. Reports of strange religious rituals, including midnight ceremonies and serpent iconography, served as the impetus for the research. Newspaper reports claim that state police discovered the community lately deserted, with evidence pointing to a rapid evacuation when they arrived to conduct an investigation. They uncovered a stone altar with carvings strikingly similar to those at Crow Hollow and a communal meeting house. Officials cited inconclusive findings as the sole reason for sealing the case file following a preliminary investigation. West Virginia in 1975, northern Minnesota in 1984, and most recently, a distant region of New Mexico in 1998, all saw the emergence of similar cases. In each case, officials found isolated communities engaging in what seemed to be a syncretic religion that combined Christian components with serpent iconography, but the congregations left before a full investigation could take place. One more point that might be pertinent is that Douglas County and a few neighboring counties saw an abnormally high number of missing people cases in the years after the events at Crow Hollow. 37 people, travelers, lone farmsteaders, and hunters were reported missing in the area between 1,877 and 1,885. The majority were never located. According to official documents, this is because of the perils of frontier life, untamed animals, and the population's ephemeral status at the time. But one can't help but wonder if there's another reason. Whether maybe folks who went too near to some isolated places ended up unintentionally becoming sacrifices to whatever sinister religion the residents of Crow Hollow had adopted. In the 1,880 seconds, Reverend Abner Holloway, a Methodist circuit preacher, went all throughout the Ozarks and documented his experiences in a thorough notebook. He spoke of meeting an old woman who lived alone in a cabin near the old Crow Hollow location in an 1882 entry. The woman claimed to be the sole person in her village who had declined to join the Serpent people years prior. Her name was Martha Gibbons, as documented by Holloway. Those who touched the object began to change. she said, becoming withdrawn and secretive, gathering at night for meetings from which she was excluded. Gibbons told him that in the final days before the disappearance of the community, she had hidden in the woods near Finley Branch and witnessed a ceremony in which her former neighbors and friends drank water in which the carved object had been submerged. Gibbons said that her neighbors had started acting strangely after Isaiah Thorne invited them to see something he had discovered while digging a well. Something old and carved with the likeness of a great serpent. Then, as if under the influence of one mind, they started digging madly. That night she ran away, and it wasn't until weeks later that she discovered the settlement deserted. According to Holloway, at first he wrote off the woman's narrative as the result of a solitary, potentially unstable mind. But her account troubled him enough that he told the county sheriff about it. There is no documentation of a subsequent investigation. During the 1964 archaeological study, the final known link to the original events was made. In one of the limestone chambers, a team member discovered a tiny metal box that was shut. The paper was sent to a university laboratory for dating, but it was reportedly destroyed in a chemical fire before analysis could be finished. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only 3 lines of text. "The serpent sleeps but does not die. What is buried will rise again. We wait in the earth for the appointed time." It disappeared before its secrets could be fully discovered, just like so much else related to Crow Hollow. Edwin Winters had a brief correspondence with a University of Arkansas folklorist studying Ozark folklore in 1968, just before his death. Winters wrote that he had observed a common pattern among the scattered settlements formed by the old inhabitants of Crow Hollow. They all settled close to water sources, especially springs or limestone caverns. Whatever religion they followed, he surmised, they needed access to cave systems or underground water. Intrigued by this finding, the folklorist started charting the known sites of these towns in relation to geological surveys. Her early research, which was never published but was documented in her scholarly works, indicated a connection with regions that had large subterranean water systems or limestone formations. She said that springs and caverns were frequently connected to magical beings in ancient Ozark legend, such as Serpent kings, who were supposed to protect hidden riches. Some aspects of the Crow Hollow enigma may make sense in light of this geological relationship. Natural caves and underground streams are frequently formed by the limestone rocks that are prevalent throughout the Ozarks. While excavating as well, Isaiah Thorne might have found such a formation, possibly even an indigenous archaeological site that had not been previously identified. Thorne may have developed a new belief system that he later spread among his neighbors as a result of this discovery and his pre-existing interest in occult ideologies. The systematic erasing of subsequent records, the ongoing trend of similar towns emerging and vanishing across the nation over decades, and the claims of odd phenomena connected to these locations, however, are all not explained by this argument. For the rest of her career, Dr. Montgomery, the archaeologist who oversaw the 1,960 seconds research, was tormented by her experiences at Crow Hollow. In an oral history interview taken just before her death in 1992, she remarked, "I have excavated sites on 3 continents, from Neolithic settlements to colonial outposts, and I have never come across anything like what we found at Crow Hollow. There was a presence there that defied scientific explanation. My equipment broke down frequently. Team members had vivid, unsettling dreams, and the tunnels, they shouldn't have been structurally sound, yet they were. Some passages seem to have been melted rather than carved from the limestone, which is simply not possible with 19th century technology." When asked further, Montgomery would not speculatively respond, only, "Some mysteries should remain buried. I've spent 30 years trying to forget what I felt in those tunnels." A hydrology study conducted in 2002 found irregularities in the underwater landscape of the reservoir that currently encompasses Crow Hollow. In contrast to the archaeological investigation conducted in the 1,960 seconds, sonar mapping showed what looked to be a far larger network of tunnels and chambers beneath the reservoir bed. No additional research was carried out because of financial limitations and the technological difficulties of underwater exploration. According to a local diver who helped with the first survey, electronic equipment malfunctioned mysteriously when it was placed over the center of these underwater formations. A unique feeling that the diver experienced was a vibration that was felt rather than heard, like standing near heavy machinery, except we were floating in open water. Thus, the case continues to be a somber episode in Ozark history that was nearly completely wiped out, existing only in rumors and tidbits. In reality, what became to the residents of Crow Hollow? What convictions or revelations prompted them to give up their former lives and choose something so drastically different? Most importantly, did their influence really disappear, or does it still exist someplace, in some form, waiting for the right moment, as the message in the metal box implied? In 2010, the Douglas County Historical Society received a request for information about Crow Hollow from a PhD student studying religious movements of the 19th century. The director of the society said this was the first official investigation of the community in almost 2 decades. According to reports, the student discovered the pertinent files gone when she came to look at the few material that was still in the local archives, even though inventory had confirmed their presence only months before. What transpired during the student's visit to the reservoir was even more unsettling. She was photographing the area for her research when she saw something strange: a circular disturbance on the water surface just above the location of the central altar, which was only visible when the photos were analyzed later. The image's technical experts were unable to provide a traditional explanation for the pattern. Shortly after, the student gave up on her investigation for personal reasons. She declined to share her findings or experiences with other academics who were interested in the Crow Hollow case. The whole truth might never be revealed to us. It appears that some mysteries will always be buried, though maybe not indefinitely. You may note that the water appears unnaturally motionless. The surrounding trees grow curiously bent, and even the birds go hushed as you pass the reservoir that now covers what was once Crow Hollow as you drive through the peaceful back roads of Douglas County today. And like so many others before you, you may wonder what's beneath those murky waters and whether it actually sleeps or just waits. An odd eel-like creature with peculiar patterns around its body that resembled the serpent symbols mentioned in historical legends of Crow Hollow was caught by a fisherman near the reservoir in 2018. Before releasing the species, he took a picture of it since he thought it might be a mutant fish. When marine researchers looked at the photo, they were unable to identify the species and speculated that it might be a native fish with a malformation or perhaps an invading species that had never been seen in Missouri waters before. Even though there is no known geothermal activity in the area, water samples collected from the reservoir later that year during normal testing revealed unique chemical compositions in the deeper sections, especially elevated quantities of minerals typically associated with underground thermal features. Although historical records show that there are no abandoned mining activities in the watershed, environmental officials blamed this on possible contamination from upstream mining operations. In early 2019, a building project for a new boat ramp at the reservoir was abruptly stopped and moved without providing a public reason. This was the latest step in the Crow Hollow story. Workers discovered structural anomalies at the original site, defined as stone formations of apparent artificial origin that did not show up on any geological study. According to internal county records that were obtained through a Freedom of Information request by a local environmental group. According to reports, the formations were reburied and the area was designated as unsuitable for development. The official material lacked images and thorough descriptions. Is there something waiting beneath Crow Hollow's waters that has withstood fire and flood, scrutiny and erasure for almost 150 years? Such options are rejected by the logical mind, which maintains that these incomplete, dispersed reports must have conventional explanations. However, the pattern endures. The consistent dispersal and re-establishment of communities with identical customs, the recurrent symbols, and the methodical erasure of evidence. It alludes to an organizing principle, a generation-spanning continuity of purpose. Maybe in 1876, Isaiah Thorne discovered something in the ground beneath his land that profoundly altered him and his neighbors, and it now has an impact on us in ways we hardly notice. Or perhaps what he discovered was only a trigger that triggered an innate human inclination to worship powers older than our fleeting civilization and what lies underneath. Regardless of the truth, the tale of Crow Hollow serves as a reminder of how brittle our certainty is and how quickly anything that is glimpsed in the shadows or that hums from below the surface of the earth can threaten the foundations of society and belief. One might imagine hearing, just on the edge of perception, the sound of numerous voices speaking in unison not from above, but from below as night falls over the Ozarks and shadows grow longer across the waters that formerly covered Crow Hollow. A reminder that certain things that are buried do not stay that way forever, and that some patterns recur over time while they wait for the appropriate circumstances to arise again. The serpent sleeps, but does not die.